I have a controversial opinion. Fictional factions based on the Roman Empire are overrated. I have seen people gush over this one stretch of human civilization far too much. Newsflash, there were better places to gush about, even in the same time period. The Sassanid Persian Empire, the Kingdom of Ethiopia, basically everything going on in the Americas, before the Spanish did what the Spanish do. So why is it number 2 right next to medieval England/France for the most reused aesthetic in fantasy is the Roman Empire? Don't get me wrong, I get appreciating the vibes, but for all that is holy, have some variety. But the worst offenders are those that just straight up steal the Roman Empire's whole flow. Don't even spice it up, they're just copying their homework. And yet, hilariously, one of the most interesting ones, while simultaneously being the objectively morally worst, is the faction that directly ripped from the history of Earth. One that is, by the admission of its own founder and leader, a militaristic nationalist dictatorship with the purpose of homogenizing everyone within to scrub away any sense of identity and culture beyond it. Following the Great War of 2077, the world had become brutal. There's no denying that. Raiders were so common that there were veritable tribes with cultures and histories all dedicated to plundering from others. Chaos rules many parts of the wasteland, even while groups like the New California Republic, Brotherhood of Steel, and the Enclave have tried to create some kind of order. But things like laws only apply when someone has a monopoly over violence. And in the wasteland, that kind of thing is a free market. Especially in areas like the southwest of America, where it was pretty much the wilder west. Towns lived and died by the slimmest margins of power between themselves and the outlaws that surrounded them, and tribalistic societies proved to be more capable of surviving the chaotic post-war world. But where there was suffering, where there was no hope, there were two groups that came to help those in the wasteland. The first of said groups were the New Canaanites, descendants of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons. Although they are often written as if the people who wrote them didn't understand the difference between Mormons and most other sects of Christianity, but I digress. From their home of Ogden, later named New Canaan, their missionaries spread across the waste trying to bring the good news and care to their neighbors, and proved to be a very accomplished society within the lands that were once Utah. The second group was the Followers of the Apocalypse, a more secular organization out of NCR territory with an altruistic desire to spread knowledge and medicine for those who lacked it. Both sides, though coming from totally different places, did a lot of good, helping uplift many communities and revive some of humanity's compassion in the process. But from both would also come some of the greatest evils the wasteland had ever seen. When an expedition of two followers, at least according to those present, some accounts say there were more, a man named Edward Sallow met with a New Canaan missionary named Joshua Graham, and they set out to communicate with disparate tribes. Trained as an anthropologist, Sallow was not all that liked amongst the followers, and the feeling was mutual. A classic narcissist who saw the group's core mission as childish and naive, Sallow tended to only focus on the subjects he had most interest in, while ignoring the more humanitarian side of the followers' teachings. On the way towards the Grand Canyon, Edward came across an old cache of books, which included two on the rise and fall of the Roman Empire and Republic, and the life of Julius Caesar. And like many who think highly of themselves, he read about the Roman Empire extensively and made that one point in history his entire personality. And much like the Roman Empire, he began making it everybody else's problem almost immediately. Due to a whole kerfuffle when trying to speak with the Blackfoot tribe, Edward, Joshua, and the doctor, Bill Calhoun, were all taken as prisoners. And it was there that Sallow saw the tribe up close and was disgusted. He saw them living in a primitive, tribal state while at war with 7 other tribes, and took action to make sure he didn't die with them. He began advising them on warfare, tactics, and the construction of weapons, whatever he could to shape the Blackfoot into something more useful, introducing them and their enemies to the kind of total warfare they'd never imagined. Brutally massacring villages, and women and children butchered as examples for those that wouldn't surrender. And sure enough, he was named War Chief of the Blackfoot, and seeing the tribal identity of each group as the root of conflict and war, he endeavored to scrub away everything that made them unique, and replace it with a new identity, conquering more tribes around them and continuing the cycle. Eventually, he christened his new force the Legion, a great military that adopted the marks and symbols of old Rome, symbols no one but he and a few educated people would even recognize, a fact he made sure to keep to himself. After all, no need for his loyal subjects to know he didn't come up with all these ideas himself. Calhoun was sent back to NCR to spread word of the Legion, while Joshua, bit by bit, found himself becoming the right hand of the new Kaiser. With every little act of obedience, Joshua the missionary became Joshua the Malpai's legate. Despite his raising as a man of God in New Canaan, he enabled Caesar's growing conquest and the worship of the ancient Roman god of war, Mars, with Caesar worshipped as his divinely ordained son. Gee, I wonder what the parallels are here, as if the narcissism wasn't apparent enough. From 2247 to 2277, the Legion proceeded to conquer every tribe in their way with ease, with each tribe added to the Legion's numbers and included another culture eradicated in Salo's bid to remake the wasteland in his image. This, of course, included the Twisted Hares, who produced a scout and later courier who would name himself Ulysses sometime later. But for now, the man who'd become Ulysses became a Frumentari, effectively the Legion's intelligence. The same campaign saw the Hydebark clan subjugated, but not as quickly as Caesar had scheduled, all due to the brutality and leadership of one man. A deadly warrior cut above the tribe he came from, and his violence earned him favor when Caesar inevitably crushed his tribe anyway. That man garnered the name Linnaeus, and would rise as the purest demonstration of the Legion's philosophy, strength, and unwavering determination to crush and beat the weakness out of the world, with as many casualties as are necessary. I'm sorry, did I say necessary? I meant possible. As many as possible. And as the years crawled, the territories of Arizona and New Mexico entirely fell under the Legion, with parts of Colorado and Utah being affected as well. Though, to be clear, the Legion wasn't really nation-building. They'd come across a tribe and integrate it through force, or if there was a more civilized town or settlement, they'd simply take it over and enforce the Legion's laws and customs. Then they'd do all the same functions that, say, a National Guard might during martial law. Defend supply lines and guard important points as the main army kept pushing westward. So, in terms of safety from outside threats, there was nowhere more secure than deep in Legion territory. Raiders had gone extinct and internal conflicts were not tolerated. Truth be told, living as a non-tribal civilian under the Legion wouldn't have been like living as a soldier. The Legion was an army, after all, not a government. Caesar was the only real civic authority and the Legion just imposed his will. So if you kept your head down whenever Legionnaires came to town and did as they asked, your life could very well be easier than it was in the other parts of the Waste. At the very least, you didn't have to worry about some crazed druggie and his gang of crackheads showing up one night to beat your head in with a bat because he was having a bad trip. Instead, you just have to worry about having your wife maybe taken as a slave by the boys in red, or alternatively, you get your head chopped off because you had a gunshot wound and used a stim pack instead of huffing Legion healing powder. But if you didn't do that, or you tried to subvert the Legion's draconian laws in any way, expect to be killed or enslaved almost immediately for your troubles. You had no real freedoms in what you believed or aspects of how you acted. If anything deviated from the will of Caesar, then you'd better believe you'd be made an example of. So yeah, your life might be safe and secure, but not really free or fair, just as Caesar thought it should be. If that seems somewhat bare bones, that you'd expect someone trying to recreate Rome to add some more internal structures, you'd be right. Because all of this, these decades of plans and wars, were only the setup for Salo's real plan. He was marching his army towards the setting sun, towards his old homeland, the new California Republic. For all its faults, Edward saw within the flag of NCR an idea that could rival the Legion's core philosophy, and he thought by conquering it he could use the bones of the NCR to remake both into a real empire, not a glorified tribe. NCR and Legion combined with Vegas as his Rome, and Caesar would at last see his vision made real. If only he'd been a little smarter. For someone who had used classic military tactics to get this far, he seems to have forgotten that the NCR was full of people with those same skills. And unlike his army, which was purposefully kept at least a little less informed than him, even at the highest levels, anyone could have the know-how to pull off a daring plan. And that's just what happened. As Joshua led the first battle of Hoover Dam, the NCR Rangers picked off his veterans and caused chaos in the Legion ranks, luring them towards the nearby Boulder City to blow them all up. It may have been a Pyrrhic victory for the NCR, but it was still a victory. The first major blow to the Legion's momentum, and as Caesar could not let anyone doubt him or think the Legion was somehow weak, he needed a scapegoat, and his very own legate would do. Joshua, who had thrown away his old identity to create this legion with Edward, was covered in pitch and lit ablaze, before being tossed into the Grand Canyon to die. Spoilers, he didn't. How? The power of love. God's love. It was a moment that made the Malpai's legate stop and see what he'd become, and in some way, Caesar had only created a legend that would terrify him and his legion more. The Burned Man. The great shame of Caesar. But whereas Joshua had lived through a second baptism to find himself again, Caesar had to find someone else to lead his army, and who else but his personal attack dog. Linnaeus, Monster of the East, became the new legate, although unlike Joshua or Sallow, he lacked any nuanced or intellectual ideas about the Legion or its purpose. He had about as much tact or depth of philosophy as a starfish had the idea of the planet Jupiter. But he was who Edward wanted and who got the job, as the following years would see the Legion and the NCR slowly try to pick each other apart from the two sides of Hoover Dam, with Mr. House watching and waiting for his own moment to strike. And as the video title suggests, I think the Legion is doomed. Besides the fact that almost everyone who isn't indoctrinated by Caesar or is Caesar himself says as much. They have several internal issues that are baked into it, which will inevitably lead to falling harder and faster than Joshua smacking into the bottom of the Grand Canyon. First is, as I've described, the fact that the Legion isn't actually a nation. It's a giant army occupying a vast territory. It has a vague sense of customs and culture, but most of that is restricted to the army, i.e. what is directly under Caesar's control. This lack of overall cultural cohesion means that without the army to keep it together, Legion territory is likely to revert to what it was before without much issue or desire to maintain its status quo. Ironically, if the Legion were to vanish, that region might still remain safe, since previously existed raider gangs have already been wiped out, and large ones aren't likely to just pop up into existence in areas that are largely self-reliant already. In places like Phoenix or Flagstaff, where the Legion's presence are stronger, chaos is almost certainly going to break out, though, so I won't pretend it's still going to be smooth sailing if the Legion just got snapped. A lot of former tribes might even come back better armed than ever to cause even bigger conflicts. The Legion's top-down formation, however, has proven to be a liability against more flexible opponents, particularly those that can take advantage of their reliance on veteran soldiers to direct the less experienced masses of the army. The same problem famously includes Caesar, as his presence is the sole thing holding the Legion together. Neither the discipline nor the culture he beat into them is strong enough to keep them unified should something happen to him. Like, I don't know, having several explosive charges set off directly beneath him so he can achieve the miracle of spaceflight? He, never came down from this, by the way. Or more urgently, a tumor growing in his head that is slowly killing him. Either way, everyone, Caesar included, knows that the Legion will break apart without him. Even if Linnaeus took over and the Legion wins the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, without the grand plan of Caesar, then the Legion will just remain a charging bull running over everything in its path until it has nowhere to go, inevitably turning back on itself when there's no other enemies to fight. And don't take my word for it, Joshua Graham, who understands its inner workings as well as anyone, knows all of this will happen without Caesar. And if you believe Ulysses, another former member of the Legion, it'll happen even if Caesar is alive. That's assuming the courier doesn't hasten the end by bombing dry wells, which, judging by its location south of Cottonwood along the river and its comparison to the Long 15, is likely a supply line to the Legion in the Mojave. With that damaged, and the divide being what it is, the massive Legion army would be further strained by undersupplying, a problem more unique to the Legion due to it being so heavily centralized in the fort and surrounding area, as compared to the NCR that is pretty spread out over the Mojave, or the robotic army of Mr. House, which circumvents all those problems to begin with. Kaisar is banking on attacking the NCR with all he's got, and while Linnaeus can keep the momentum going, what becomes of the Legion afterwards with so much put into just one victory is up in the air. As pointed out by the Courier themselves, if it takes all the East to claim and hold the West, then the East will be without the Legion's presence that maintains order. Unlike NCR, where a general sense of national character at least keeps a thin layer of adherence to the laws. If the only thing keeping everyone in check is too busy in the West, then the Legion Heartland may fall into chaos before the war is even over. Unlike the East, NCR lands are not as tribal, and so will not be as easily homogenized into the Legion, and will continuously resist due to having a larger national identity as compared to independent settlements in New Mexico or Arizona. NCR land isn't the only issue to be had either, as Utah remains a theater of conquest that's proven unstable. Ironically, by the Whitelegs sacking New Canaan and destabilizing the region in order to impress Kaisar and join the Legion, it led to tribes like the 80s becoming more daring and willing to expand their influence, which can become a problem for any future Legion leader, Linnaeus or otherwise. Which is, of course, another issue. If both Linnaeus and Kaisar die, then the Legion is really out of luck, because even in the endings of the game where the Legion loses, it's generally understood you didn't end the Legion itself. Heck, it can end with both Kaisar and Linnaeus still alive, at least for now. You can even get rid of his tumor and then send his army back east where it belongs. But whereas that might be for the best, at least for the Legion's longevity, not anyone else's, you also can send the Legion packing with both its primary leaders dead. Utah under the control of the 80s if you beat down the Whitelegs, and of course Drywell's turned into a memory. They leave the Mojave when they're beaten anyway, so any losses there are expected, but those three instances can cripple an already beaten army. When their entire philosophy and culture is built on the idea of the strong deserving to exist, and they've lost not once but twice, and their military and cultural leaders are dead with more enemies than ever? Well, call me a pessimist for their chances at unifying again. No other Legionnaire has even an ounce of the influence Kaisar, Linnaeus, or Graham had, and since that last one is definitely not interested and the other two can die, you have the power to royally screw them up. Without the Courier, Kaisar is likely to die anyway of his tumor, and Linnaeus doesn't have the character to hold the Legion up if it's already crumbling like that. Maybe the army, but he'd likely be stuck with numerous internal problems from the lack of confidence in his ability to govern. Pretty much everyone, even the game itself, depicts Linnaeus as not even a tenth of the leader Kaisar was. So on his own, even if they win, the Legion is doomed. Now you may argue, my little straw man of the comments, what about in their most successful outcome? The Courier saves Kaisar, the Whitelegs are allowed to do as they please, or hey, you can kill Joshua yourself, and you nuke the Long 15 and choke out the bear. That last one Ulysses may do anyway, though the Courier has to exist for that to happen, but you get my point. This ideal result would see the Courier handing the Mojave and likely much of Utah and the chunks of NCR into old Edward's hands, giving him far more than just the Rome he wanted. The infrastructure, the culture, the military, Kaisar can begin shaping the empire he'd always wanted to make real. And I think it's not going to last. What Edward here is trying to do is effectively reverse engineer the natural growth of a civilization and force the two halves he wants into each other without any of the baggage that comes with it. A forceful and planned recreation of the Roman Republic, represented by the NCR, being turned into the Roman Empire by the might of his legion. The problem is that he is expecting not only the culture he created, but the culture of Vegas and the NCR to just be subsumed in the incoming clash, so that a new one more fit for his plans would be born. Unfortunately, trying to manhandle hundreds of thousands of individuals into a specific set of societal ideals is a lot easier said than done. He has spent decades indoctrinating an entire army of men into one set of ideals, and just expects the savagery he's imposed on them to be done away with because he wants them to be a little bit more civilized? Don't get me wrong, obviously he still wants his legion to be brutal and efficient, but if he's expecting any level of the society and civilization of the Roman Empire to come back in his army just because he makes them conquer the NCR, then he is crazy. Linnaeus is a perfect example of why this can't work, as shown when he's leading the Legion to victory. He, like the Legion, was taught that victory means you've earned the right to exist, and your enemy did not. What is to be learned from your fallen foe whenever you have that mindset, beyond more complex military tactics? If Linnaeus claims Vegas, then it'll just become another waypoint as he keeps going west until his army exhausts itself. It doesn't adopt any facet of the culture they crushed because Caesar's philosophy hinges on his active participation, on jury-rigging a group identity. Without his influence, the society he's already created will keep doing what it's been taught to do, and sometimes, even when he is present, they still develop away from his desire, such as with Joshua Graham and the legends of the Burned Man. Legends he's tried to stifle repeatedly. Edward is effectively one of those pseudo-intellectuals who can't conceive of reality not working exactly like a strict theoretical model dictates it should, denying any evidence to the contrary and pushing forward to his inevitable failure. A future that everyone and their mother can see, even if he doesn't. A future where the bull devours itself and collapses without the central figure that it came to rely on for everything. A man who purposefully designed a society unable to function without him as its intellectual leader, getting exactly what he wanted as the Legion becomes ruined without him. And as we can tell from the show, there's no Legion flags anywhere, so it's unlikely he or any proposed version of the Legion has made progress in that way. There's also the sort of meta-narrative reason that, do you really think they're going to revive the Legion of all story elements for the TV show? If the NCR is, as far as we've seen, a shell of its former self, then there's no thematic reason to bring back the Legion. The Legion's whole point was to challenge the idea that a democratic system was what humanity needed to survive in the New World, with the NCR as its foil. If the show were to optimistically just downgrade the NCR to the background, then the Legion's purpose in the story also becomes downgraded. Meaning, for the purposes of the show, the most we might see is some raiding parties of the Legion, but likely not as we know it. If I had to guess, it'll be a shadow of itself, more an idea than the glorious empire that Caesar had envisioned. But rather poetically, that idea may outlast the man or his dream. No matter how it ends for the Legion, the impact it's left on the wasteland and the lives it's scarred will remain forever. If it does fall apart, the images and ideas it inspired will certainly become etched into any new tribe or nation that rises from their shadows to, much like the NCR to America, paint a new future in the hue of the old. On that colorful note, that will be all from me today, and thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed and got this far, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, all that YouTube jazz. And a big wonderful shout out to my patrons and channel members generously offering tribute to me, that we may one day overwhelm and overcome the online wasteland that is YouTube. Like my newest patron, Admiral Vape. I really hope I pronounced that right. Who, as the name suggests, commands a fleet of vaporwave ships, which are basically just yachts teched out with stereos to blast vaporwave music as loud as possible. And my newest channel member, Mark Carney. It's Mark Carney, bruh. What more do you want me to say? If you'd like to support me directly, consider joining for a range of benefits, including watching videos like this one much earlier than the YouTube release. But it's no pressure. Just being here is supporting me all the same. So without any further ado, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time, around the hearth. I gotta be honest with you, these choices are not looking great. A decrepit republic too corrupt and land-hungry to take care of itself, much less anyone it's trying to conquer, and a ravenous horde of crazy people in hockey pads frothing at the mouth about their bald-headed god king. You know, sometimes I think Vegas could use a softer touch, a more experienced one. One who knows the land like the back of his servo. A word of warning. When in doubt, bet on the house.